On November 13th, 1971, a horrific crime shook the small town of The Pass, Manitoba. Helen Betty Osborne, a 19-year-old Cree woman, was abducted in broad daylight, just 2:30 in the afternoon, while walking home. What followed was an act of unimaginable brutality. She was beaten, raped, and stabbed over 50 times before being left to die in the freezing snow. The crime was so vicious, it stunned the entire community. But what made this case even more devastating was how the justice system failed Helen Betty. Despite multiple witnesses and suspects, it would take 16 long years before anyone was held accountable. This is the story of a murder that exposed deep racial injustices in Canada, and the painful fight for justice that followed. From the very beginning, the investigation was mishandled. 4 white men, Dwayne Johnston, James Houghton, Norman Manger, and Lee Colgan, were implicated in Helen Betty's murder. Witnesses reported seeing them with her that day, and rumors swirled in the pass about who was involved. Yet for years, police did almost nothing. No arrests were made. No serious interrogations took place. The case grew colder as time passed, while Helen Betty's family and the Cree community grieved without answers. Many believed that if the victim had been white or the suspects Indigenous, the response would have been swift and severe. But systemic racism allowed this case to stall, leaving a killer to walk free. It wasn't until 1987, after years of public pressure and media scrutiny, that charges were finally filed. Only one of the 4 suspects, Dwayne Johnston, was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The others, James Houghton, Norman Manger, and Lee Colgan, walked away without facing justice, despite strong evidence linking them to the crime. The trial revealed shocking details. Witnesses had stayed silent out of fear, and police had ignored crucial leads. Even worse, it became clear that the case could have been solved much sooner if authorities had taken it seriously from the start. The legal system's failures were undeniable, and they left a permanent scar on Helen Betty's family and the Indigenous community. The case was officially closed on February 12, 1999, but the pain lingered. For decades, Helen Betty's family fought for accountability, not just for the killers, but for the justice system that failed her. Finally, on July 14, 2000, the Manitoba government issued an official apology, acknowledging the racism and incompetence that plagued the investigation. It was a small measure of justice, but an important one. The apology admitted what Indigenous communities had known all along, that Helen Betty's life was undervalued because of her race, and that the system had betrayed her. Helen Betty Osborne's story is more than just a crime. It's a symbol of the systemic racism that still affects Indigenous women in Canada. Her murder exposed how biases in policing, legal delays, and community silence can deny justice to marginalized victims. Today, her name is remembered in discussions about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIWG, a crisis that continues to claim lives. While her case finally saw some accountability, thousands of Indigenous families still wait for answers about their missing loved ones. Helen Betty's legacy is a call to action, a demand for change in how Indigenous victims are treated by the justice system. Helen Betty Osborne's story is more than just a crime. It's a symbol of the systemic racism that still affects Indigenous women in Canada. Her murder exposed how biases in policing, legal delays, and community silence can deny justice to marginalized victims. Today, her name is remembered in discussions about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIWG, a crisis that continues to claim lives. While her case finally saw some accountability, thousands of Indigenous families still wait for answers about their missing loved ones. Helen Betty's legacy is a call to action, a demand for change in how Indigenous victims are treated by the justice system. So what can we learn from this tragedy? Helen Betty's case teaches us that justice delayed is justice denied. It shows how racism can corrupt investigations and how silence can protect killers. But it also reminds us of the power of perseverance. Her family never gave up, and neither did the activists who pushed for answers. While the Manitoba government's apology was a step forward, real change requires systemic reform. Indigenous women deserve safety, respect, and swift justice, not decades of waiting. Helen Betty's memory lives on as a reminder of the work still to be done. As we reflect on this case, we must ask ourselves, how many more Indigenous women have been failed by the system? How many cases remain unsolved because of prejudice or neglect? Helen Betty Osborne's story is not just history, it's a warning. A warning that without accountability, without reform, these injustices will continue. But it's also a story of resilience. A reminder that even in the face of overwhelming injustice, voices can rise, truths can be uncovered, and change is possible. Her name will not be forgotten, and neither will the fight for justice she represents.